My son gives me a shocking present after heart surgery, so I decide to get back at him. He poisoned me for inheritance. I paid him back with the truth. It was my 78th birthday, though you would not have known it from how the day unfolded. The dining room was full. My son Daniel, his wife Melissa, their 2 children, and even Melissa's mother had made the trip from Spokane. The house smelled faintly of candles, not because they had lit any for me, but because Melissa had been baking brownies for her Pilates group later that evening. I sat quietly at the end of the table, in the same chair I had eaten breakfast in every day since we moved in together. I thought maybe someone would hug me, maybe my grandson at least, but no one did. There was no cake, not even a cupcake. No balloons, no singing, just a box. A small box about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in supermarket gift paper with a plastic bow slapped on top. Daniel slid it across the table toward me, avoiding eye contact, as if he was tossing scraps to a stray cat. "Here," he said, "a little something for the laundry queen." I opened the box with slow hands, hands that once carried him through fevered nights and held back the world so he could walk forward untouched. Inside, nestled in pink tissue paper, was a plastic toy washing machine, the kind you would give a toddler, bright purple and yellow with a fake door that clicked when you turned it. Alongside it was a small folded card. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it. "Happy birthday to the old hag of the laundry room." Melissa burst out laughing. "We figured you'd need something to keep you company in recovery," she said, wiping her eyes. "Play with this while you rest, and when you're back on your feet, we've got a real mountain of clothes waiting. But don't worry, we'll keep the nice machine locked so you do not break it." Daniel smirked. "Or maybe learn to live without conveniences for once. This is not a hotel, Mom." Their kids giggled and looked down at the little toy spinning in my lap and smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but the kind that comes from knowing something they do not. No one cared enough to ask, especially not about the open-heart surgery I'd scheduled for 2 weeks later. At 78, that was no small thing. But I had scheduled it quietly, paid for it from my pension and savings, and informed them only because I would need a ride home. Daniel had shrugged when I told him. I looked around the table. Melissa was already scrolling through her phone. Daniel poured himself another glass of wine. The children were arguing over an iPad. Melissa's mother was picking lint from her sweater. And I sat there, still holding the toy, thinking of all the birthdays before this one. The ones where Daniel would draw me cards in crayon, where he would wake me up with burnt toast and orange juice on a tray. The ones when I used to think I had raised a good man. I remembered selling my gold wedding bangles, skipping meals so he could remain in school, and working double shifts, each a silent investment in his future. Now here he was, 47, and his birthday gift to me was a child's toy and a roomful of humiliation. "Thank you," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. "It's very thoughtful," Daniel chuckled. "Well, you always said you liked practical gifts." I looked at him, really looked. The lines around his mouth had deepened, and there was a hardness in his eyes I had chosen not to see until now. Melissa still had that brittle smile, the one she wore when she was being cruel but wanted to sound polite. She had never liked me, not from the first moment I stepped into their apartment with a hot casserole and offered to help with their newborn. To her, I had always been just a shadow, an extra burden, a reminder that the world did not revolve around her. I placed the toy washing machine on the table with deliberate care, as if it were a relic carved from my life's sacrifices. It made a little beeping sound as it settled. "Well," Melissa said, standing up, "we should get going. I have to be up early and the kids have school. Happy birthday again. Try not to stay up too late watching those reruns." Daniel gave me a pat on the shoulder, not a hug, not a kiss, just a pat, like you would give a coworker after a presentation. "See you in a couple weeks, Mom. Text me if you need a ride home from the hospital. If I don't respond, just Uber." And they left. I sat in the silence after they were gone. The house smelled like Melissa's brownies. The toy washing machine blinked in the dim light. I listened to the ticking of the wall clock and the creak of the floorboards above as the family settled into their bedrooms. I looked around this house, the house I had paid half for when Daniel could not afford the down payment. The house where I changed my grandson's diapers and made chicken soup when Melissa had the flu. The house where I had been a cook, maid, babysitter, and now, apparently, a joke. That night I did not cry. I sat there, back straight, and watched the moonlight reflect off the plastic toy. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small notepad I always carried. I wrote 2 words. Remember this. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because sometimes the only way to survive cruelty is to record it, so you know you are not imagining it. They thought I was too old to matter, too soft to resist, too grateful to speak up. I slipped the note between the pages of my recipe book, the one Daniel never touched. If I ever doubted my memory, I would return to that page. But I never needed to. But I remembered everything, and I had just begun, _. 2 weeks later, I walked myself into the hospital for open-heart surgery. I did not ask Daniel or Melissa to come with me. I did not want to see the looks on their faces if the surgery failed. I had already prepaid for everything, from the anesthesiologist to the post-op medications, using the savings I had set aside years ago. The money came from quiet sacrifices. No vacations, no new clothes, just slow, steady discipline that no one noticed. The surgery was successful, though the doctor told me the recovery would be delicate. I was instructed not to lift anything heavier than a gallon of milk for at least 3 weeks. They told me to stay warm, avoid emotional stress, and take my medications exactly as prescribed. Daniel picked me up from the hospital. He did not say much, just scrolled on his phone while I struggled into the car. Melissa was not with him. She had yoga. When we got home, he dropped my bag just inside the door. You can rest for a bit, but Melissa needs the laundry done by tonight. The kids are running low on socks. The machine's out back. You remember how to use it, right? I stared at him, unsure if he was serious. My chest still felt like it had been cracked open. My left hand was wrapped in gauze from the IV, and I could feel the surgical tape pulling at the stitches beneath my clothes. Yes, I said, I remember. He nodded, satisfied. Cool. The laundry machine was out in the back patio, a decades-old rusted unit Daniel had found online for cheap. The door was misaligned and needed a shove to close. The area around it had no cover, just cracked pavement and weeds. I waited until the kids left for school and Melissa left for her errands. Then I wrapped myself in 2 scarves and took the basket out, step by step. It was late November. Cold rain fell in sheets, turning the ground to slick stone. I fumbled with the laundry basket, wincing every time I bent. My knees shook from the cold and the weight. I tried to push the door shut on the machine, but my strength failed me. The wind howled, the rain seeped through my cardigan, and then I slipped. It was not a dramatic fall, just enough to twist my hip and send me down on one knee. The basket toppled, underwear and shirt spilling into the wet dirt. My left side hit the cement hard, and I gasped as the pain shot through my rib cage. I sat there for a few minutes. Wet and shivering, no one came. Eventually, I pushed myself up, one hand braced on the wall, and finished the load. I stood outside for another 20 minutes while the machine shook and groaned through its cycle. When I brought the clothes in and started to fold them, Melissa walked into the kitchen. She barely looked up. "What happened to your clothes?" "I slipped," I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Slipped or faked it to get out of work?" "I slipped." She snorted. "You know, if you're going to live here rent-free, the least you can do is not make things harder." I nodded. I did not argue. My hip throbbed. My ribs ached. My surgical wound stung. But I kept folding. That night at dinner, Daniel joined in. "I mean, seriously, Mom. We all have our stuff to deal with. You think we can drop everything to wait on a woman who retired 20 years ago?" I looked at my plate. They had made macaroni and cheese from a box. There was no portion for me. Melissa handed me a can of soup. "Heat that up if you're hungry," she said. "We're watching our carbs." I took the can, heated it in the microwave, and ate at the counter while they laughed in the dining room. The grandkids were telling a story about a game they played at school. I smiled softly, though no one noticed. That night, I stared at the ceiling of the guest room. My bones ached. I could feel every beat of my repaired heart. I thought of all the ways I had been of service, raising Daniel alone after his father died, cleaning up his messes, protecting him when his reckless choices threatened to ruin him. I had become invisible, slowly, over time. Not even as a person, just as a function, not a mother. A machine, a laundry machine. And like any machine, they expected me to work until I broke. But machines do not remember. I do. _ 3 weeks passed after the surgery, and the pain in my chest had lessened, but something else began to trouble me. It started with my hands. My fingers, once dry and thin but reliable, had turned a strange shade of gray-brown, like bruises buried under the skin. At first, I thought it was the cold, or maybe poor circulation, but then I noticed the tremors. My left eye blurred in the mornings. I found myself dizzy after standing, and my heart, though freshly repaired, began to pound unevenly again. The doctor had said this might happen, but not this soon, not this intensely. One morning, while Melissa was at the gym and Daniel was working from his office upstairs, I sat quietly at the kitchen table and unfolded the prescription sheet I had hidden inside a cookbook. It was the original list my cardiologist gave me post-surgery, with every pill, dosage, and schedule handwritten and underlined. Then I walked to the pantry and pulled out the weekly pill box Daniel had filled for convenience. I took out each tablet and matched them to the list. Some weren't even close. A few pills had the right color but wrong shape. One had no markings at all. Another was twice the dosage listed, and one, a pale blue capsule, was not on the list at all. My fingers trembled, but not from fear. I remembered something. It was 38 years ago. Daniel had been 6, feverish and shivering, moaning through the night, while I stayed up to sponge his head. At dawn, with no car, no neighbors willing to help, I wrapped him in a blanket and walked 1.5 miles to the rural clinic. Every step felt like I was carrying fire in my arms. But I got him there. He had pneumonia. The doctor said if I had waited even 2 more hours, he might not have survived. Now here I was, wondering if that same child, my child, had poisoned me. I needed proof. There was a woman I knew once, a pharmacist named Judy. We had worked together for a short time back in the ADS when I was cleaning at the local health center. She had sharp eyes and a sharper memory. I called her from a payphone in the supermarket parking lot, using a prepaid card I kept for emergencies. "Judy," I said, "it's Nora. I need a favor. I think someone is giving me the wrong medication." She didn't ask questions. I described the pills and promised to get a few to her. That night, when everyone was asleep, I crept into the kitchen and packed 2 samples from each suspicious pill into a tiny container I had used for sewing needles. The next morning, I mailed it using an anonymous envelope and an old P.O. box I still kept under my maiden name. 3 days passed, then a week. On the 8th day, I received a voicemail from Judy. "Nora, call me back, now." Her voice was tight. I called her immediately. "You were right," she said. "Some of those pills are legitimate, but 2 of them aren't. One is a sedative not meant for someone your age, and the other, Nora, that blue capsule, it's not approved for human use in the US. It's been flagged in some veterinary databases. It slows heart rate, dangerously. It can build up in the system, quiet, subtle, almost undetectable." I closed my eyes and whispered to no one. He waited until I was weakest, until I could not fight back. But he forgot. Some roots grow deepest in winter. I did not speak. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Now I am." I hung up and sat on the porch. The air was cold, but I barely felt it. I should have cried. I should have called the police. I should have screamed at Daniel, demanded answers, confronted him with trembling hands and a mother's rage. But I did not. Because rage burns fast and wild. I needed something colder, slower. I needed truth, and I needed time. That night, I lay in bed and replayed every moment from the last 3 months. Every meal they handed me, every joke Melissa made about getting the house sooner than expected, every time they laughed when I coughed, every glance, every whisper. Daniel knew. Maybe not the full science, maybe not the dosage, but he knew. And still, I remembered holding him to my chest during thunderstorms. I remembered singing to him when he was too scared to sleep alone. I remembered selling my wedding ring to buy him a suit for his first job interview. None of that had been enough. He had chosen greed, so I chose silence. But silence with a plan. I wrote a new list, not of medications, of steps. I contacted an attorney anonymously, using the same P.O. box and a prepaid phone. I began transferring small amounts of my money to a private account. Melissa and Daniel did not know existed. I scanned every paper in the house, every title, every will, every insurance form. I started documenting things, recording short conversations, saving text messages, cataloging slights. I became what they thought I had already been, invisible. But I was not gone. I was watching, and I was waiting. The house grew louder with excitement as Daniel and Melissa prepared for their 10-year wedding anniversary. Invitations arrived in glossy envelopes. Decorations were sorted in the dining room. Even the children were involved, rehearsing little speeches and songs. I had not been given an invitation, not even a mention. One morning, I stood in the kitchen folding towels and asked, "Is there anything I can do to help for the celebration?" Melissa glanced at me without lifting her head from her phone. "Actually, yes," she said. "You can stay home. We want everything to feel, elegant." Daniel, standing nearby, chuckled. "Yeah, Mom, we'll bring you some cake, all right?" I nodded slowly. Of course, that makes sense. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, lit only by a small lamp. The toy washing machine still sat on the shelf. I looked at it a long moment, then turned to the closet. From a hidden corner, I pulled out a small fireproof safe. I had not opened it in years. Inside were a few yellowing documents, photos, and one envelope, sealed, untouched for 30 years. I opened it now. Inside was the DNA test I had quietly arranged 3 decades ago. I had found it by accident, an insurance mix-up that had flagged inconsistent medical history. At the time, Daniel was 17. My husband was still alive. I asked questions, I got half answers, and eventually I found the truth. Daniel was not mine by blood. My husband had an affair and brought the child home, claiming he was a cousin's orphan. I believed him until the years peeled the paint off the lie. I raised Daniel anyway. I fed him, held him, sacrificed for him, loved him. Not because he was mine by birth, but because he needed a mother, and I had love to give. Now, that love had run dry. I placed the test results in a new envelope and slid them into the inner pocket of my coat. Then I turned to the desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out a flash drive. For the past 2 months, I had recorded everything. The way Melissa spoke to me when no one else was listening. The way Daniel spoke about me when he thought I was asleep. The clips from the baby monitor in the hallway. Melissa had forgotten it was still plugged in, showing Daniel tampering with my medication tray. There was a video, too, one I had captured myself. I had set up a tiny camera behind the flour canister in the kitchen. It showed Daniel crushing something with a spoon, then stirring it into my tea. I had watched that video 3 times. The first time, I cried. The second time, I shook. The third time, I went still. I copied everything onto the flash drive. Then I wrote a letter, to be opened only if something happens to me before December 12. I made a copy of my will, the original, notarized and sealed, left everything I owned, every dollar, every object of value, not to Daniel, but to my granddaughter Emily. She was 10. She was the only one in that house who had ever truly looked at me. I slid the will into a heavy envelope, then placed it, along with the flash drive and DNA results, into the lining of my coat. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and stared at myself. An old woman. Faint bruises under the eyes, wrinkles like riverbeds. But the eyes, they were steady. They thought I was a servant, a senile relic, a ghost. But I had never been sharper. The board was set. Now I waited for the perfect move. The ballroom shimmered with golden lights. White tablecloths, tall floral arrangements, and waiters dressed in tuxedos glided between tables. Daniel and Melissa stood center stage, beaming as if they had just discovered happiness. Their 10-year anniversary party looked more like a celebrity wedding than a family celebration. I had arrived quietly. They had not expected me, but I knew they would not dare turn me away in front of so many people. I wore a simple dark blue dress and my old gray coat, buttoned all the way up. The seats were full: former classmates, co-workers, Melissa's extended family, people I had never met. But I recognized the looks, that mixture of superficial charm and passive judgment. I sat near the back, alone. After dinner, the lights dimmed. "We'd like to share something special," Melissa announced. Her voice echoed through the speakers. "A little trip down memory lane with the people who shaped our love story." The screen lit up. Photos began flashing one by one. Daniel as a toddler, held by a woman who was not me. Daniel and Melissa's engagement, wedding, honeymoon. Melissa's mother holding their newborn daughter. Daniel playing soccer with his son. The slideshow lasted 5 minutes. I was in none of the pictures, not one. Then came the final slide. It was projected full screen in high resolution. A blown-up photo of the toy washing machine. Beneath it, in looping cursive font, "Dedicated to the old hag who taught us what not to become." There was a beat of silence. Then the laughter started, first from a few tables, then more. Melissa chuckled into the microphone. A little inside joke. I stood up. Slowly, steadily, I walked toward the stage. Every eye turned toward me. Daniel looked startled. Melissa froze. I stepped up and held out a small flash drive. "Since we're sharing memories," I said, "I brought one too." The technician hesitated, then, seeing Daniel nod with a nervous smile, plugged it into the laptop. The screen went black. A moment later, audio filled the room. Daniel's voice. "I swear, if I have to watch that old woman drag her bony feet to the washer one more time, I'll lose it. One of these days I'm going to smear detergent in her mouth just to shut her up." Gasps rippled through the audience. Melissa's voice responded, "Please, we just need her to keep folding clothes until she drops. Once the insurance clears, we're good." Some laughter now turned to whispers. The next video appeared. Grainy footage from a kitchen camera. Daniel, crushing powder into a cup, stirring it with a spoon, then walking toward the living room, where I sat, unaware. Then came the final clip. A voice message. Daniel's voice again, speaking to a friend. "She's on her last leg anyway. The meds will push her over, and if all goes well, I should have the house by January, maybe even sooner." A woman in the crowd covered her mouth. Another man stood up and walked out. Daniel stepped forward, face pale. "Mom, what is this? This is taken out of context. You're twisting things." I turned to the audience. "For those of you who have just laughed at a joke made at my expense, this is who you've been clapping for." Silence. "I raised that boy. I loved him. Even after I found out the truth." I pulled out the envelope from my coat. "This is a DNA test. I've known for 30 years that Daniel isn't my biological son, but I raised him anyway, fed him, sheltered him, protected him." Melissa tried to grab the microphone. I stepped back. No more silence, no more pretending. People were standing now, some in shock, some shaking their heads. A man from Daniel's work whispered something and walked away, phone in hand. Daniel reached toward me. "Mom, please." I looked at him, and my voice didn't waver. "I may not be your mother by blood, but I was your mother in every way that mattered, and this," I held up the flash drive, "is how you repaid me." Then I turned and walked off the stage. Behind me, the room erupted, not in applause, but in murmurs, judgment, disbelief. I did not look back. Underscoring the silence in the ballroom was no longer polite. It was the kind that suffocates. I stood on the edge of the stage, the DNA envelope still in my hand. I looked Daniel in the eye, not with hate, but with the clarity of someone who has removed the last veil of illusion. "You are not my son," I said calmly, "not by blood." The room gasped again, but this time it was a hollow sound, shock without oxygen. "I have known since you were 5 years old," I continued. "I had my suspicions when you needed a medical test and the blood type didn't match. Your father confessed it to me on a cold February night. He had an affair. The woman abandoned you. And he brought you home with lies in his hands and fear in his heart." I held the envelope slightly higher, but didn't open it. "This test confirmed it. 30 years ago. I could have left. I could have told you the truth then, but I didn't." I turned to face the room. I chose to raise him, to give him my name, my care, my history. I held him when he was sick. I clapped at every school play. I stayed up at night sewing costumes and baking cookies. I was there for every broken bone, every heartbreak. I taught him to read. I taught him to respect women. A pause. But he did not learn. Melissa had gone pale. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. My mistake, I said, and my voice trembled only slightly, was believing that love could substitute blood, that kindness could rewrite lineage. I looked at him again. My mistake was believing that being a mother was enough. In the back of the room someone stood up. It was Uncle Harris, my late husband's cousin. He had been quiet all evening, but now he spoke, his voice low and steady. He does not deserve your name. Others murmured in agreement. I have watched you pour your soul into that boy, said Aunt Regina, her voice thick with emotion. And he served you poison in return. Daniel stepped forward, his voice shaking. You raised me, that makes you my mother. No, I replied. I was your shield, your maid, your safety net. But you never let me be your mother. Not once. I turned to the crowd again. For years I lived in silence, thinking maybe he would come around, maybe he would remember. But people don't forget what they don't value. I took a breath. You laughed at a joke tonight. A joke about an old woman. A joke that was rooted in rot. I pointed to the screen, still frozen on the image of the toy washing machine. That was your symbol of love. But this, I held the envelope to my heart, this is my truth. A few guests were already gathering their things. Chairs shifted. The weight of shame was settling in. I don't want pity, I said firmly. I want acknowledgement. I want people to understand what happens when you let love blind you to betrayal, and what happens when you refuse to stay silent. Daniel muttered, You're doing this to humiliate me. No, I said, I am doing this to free myself. Emily, my granddaughter, walked up the aisle. She stood beside me and held my hand. Her small fingers curled into mine, warm and firm. Someone whispered audibly, She deserves better. A man in a dark blazer turned to Melissa and said, I don't work with men who drug their mothers. Effective immediately, your husband is off our board. Melissa looked like she might collapse. I looked at Daniel one last time. You were a child when I took you in. I do not blame you for your origin, but I do blame you for your choices. I stepped off the stage, Emily still holding my hand, and behind me, the crowd unraveled. Underscore silence had returned to the ballroom, but this time it was not heavy, it was hollow. I stood in the center, now not just a woman, but a witness. From my coat I pulled out a second envelope. This one was sealed with a wax stamp, bearing the initials of my attorney. I have one more thing to share, I said. My will. I looked around that room one last time. The same faces who had laughed now looked down at their glasses. Guilt is a silent guest. It never asks permission to stay. Gasps again, though no one dared speak. This, I continued, is the legally notarized court-certified document that outlines what happens when I die. And since so many of you tonight have acted as if I already have, I thought I would save you the suspense. I opened the envelope, unfolded the pages, and read aloud. Upon the death of Nora Mae Caldwell, all property, assets, holdings, bank accounts, and shares, as well as the house located on 214 Maple Grove Lane, shall be transferred in full to one individual, Emily Caldwell. My granddaughter, the only one who still calls me Grandma. There was a beat of stunned silence, then a noise, a loud shuffle of footsteps. Daniel lurched forward. You're lying, he shouted. You're not even thinking straight. Give me that. He made a grab for the will, but two men in suits stepped between us. Security, I said calmly, courtesy of the venue and the law office. The taller one turned to Daniel. Sir, this document was filed and verified weeks ago. You're advised not to cause a scene. Melissa let out a strangled laugh somewhere between disbelief and hysteria. This is a joke, she hissed. She's manipulating all of you. She's senile. The lawyer, who had stepped quietly forward, now held up a tablet. Video testimony, signed under oath, time-stamped and sealed. Ms. Caldwell is of sound mind and judgment. Daniel was shaking now, his fists clenched, his face flushed. But he could do nothing. From behind us, chairs scraped as people began to stand. Some gathered their coats in silence, others whispered apologies. One woman muttered, "I cannot believe I came here for this." I watched as guests left. Their faces no longer lit with celebration, but with shame. One guest filmed Daniel's outburst on her phone. Another took pictures of the will. I saw hashtags forming in the minds of strangers. I saw the ripple begin. Daniel screamed, "This isn't over!" But it was. It was over the moment he put poison above parenthood. It was over the moment he traded compassion for control. I felt Emily squeeze my hand. She looked up at me and said, with a voice stronger than her years, "Grandma, you've cleaned too many dirty memories. Let me clean the world for you now." Her words were soft, but they struck harder than any courtroom sentence. In that moment, I saw not just my heir, but my legacy. I knelt to her level, eye to eye. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "you are the only thing I ever got right." The lawyer handed her a smaller envelope. "This is for her education," I said aloud, "and her freedom." Someone clapped. One slow, steady clap. Then another joined, and another. Not everyone applauded, but enough did. Daniel stood alone in a room he thought would praise him. Now, it only echoed with the sound of people leaving. The final image burned into my memory. My coat, my will, my granddaughter, and a man who thought inheritance was owed, not earned. He had forgotten one thing. Truth does not need an invitation. It just needs a witness. _ The senior living home was nothing like the stereotypes. It was nestled near the edge of a quiet forest, where birds sang instead of traffic, and the air smelled of pine and promise. There were gardens, real ones, with flowers I could name and herbs I had once grown. There was a library, with deep leather chairs and real silence, the kind that listens. I moved in 3 weeks after the party. Emily visited every weekend. Sometimes she brought me books, sometimes just herself. Every time, she brought peace. In my new room, sunlight streamed through tall windows. I placed a single photograph on the side table, a picture of the toy washing machine sitting crookedly in a trash bin. I had taken it myself before leaving Daniel's house. I had added a caption in black marker. "I used to wash out of love. They taught me to wash to survive. Now I exist on truth." Next to the photo, I placed a small brass box. Inside were ashes, the burnt remains of the last family photo we had taken, a posed lie at Daniel's wedding, everyone smiling, everyone pretending. I had burned it on my last night at the house. The smoke rose into the cold air, as if lifting the burden from my chest. It did not hurt to watch it crumble. It felt like shedding skin. The nurses here call me Ms. Caldwell, but Emily still calls me Grandma. The word lands softer now, not as a duty, but as a song. One afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Emily reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were growing longer, stronger. "Do you miss the house?" she asked. "No," I said. "A house is just a box. I carried the home in me." She nodded, wise beyond her years. "I keep a journal now. Not of pain, but of memory. I write in it each morning with a pen I bought for myself. The last entry I wrote said this: "I spent my life washing clothes, cleaning messes I did not make. I was told that was love. Then I was told it was expected. But I know now. True love leaves room for dignity, and truth does not fold." Outside, the wind moved the branches like dancers. I do not know how many more seasons I will see, but I know this: my last years will be mine, and when I close my eyes for the final time, I will not see a laundry basket. I will see a child's hand holding mine, not because she needs something, but because she wants me here. And that will be enough, _ 2 weeks. After the party, a letter arrived at the senior living home. It came in a cream-colored envelope, no return address, with a careful script that read, "To the woman who reminded us how to stand." Inside was a note, handwritten in blue ink. "I was at that party. I didn't know who you were when I sat down, but I left knowing who I want to be when I grow old. Thank you. You made me call my mother, for the first time in 5 years." There was no name, just a signature. Someone's daughter. More letters followed. A local blog picked up the video, then a national one. Within a week, my story had been reposted across parenting forums, caregiving sites, and even financial planning networks with the title, "The Will That Shut Down a Party," and a lie. People called it brave, some called it tragic, but the word that appeared most often? Justified. The director of the senior living home knocked gently one morning and said, "Miss Caldwell, there's someone here to see you." I assumed it was Emily. It was not. It was the nurse who had cared for me at the hospital post-surgery. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a bouquet of lavender. "I recognized you from the video," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't say more that day. I thought maybe you had people waiting for you at home." I smiled gently. "I did, just not the kind you hope for." She sat down beside me and added, "You changed the conversation. Around here, we've started offering legal workshops for seniors about wills, power of attorney, your rights, because of you." I felt something stir in my chest, not pride, something deeper, restoration. Later that week, I received a small envelope from the Department of Social Services. It was a formal letter informing me that an investigation had been opened against Daniel and Melissa for elder abuse and medical fraud. A lawyer had submitted my recordings anonymously. I smiled. I knew who it was. Justice did not always come with handcuffs. Sometimes it came with frozen assets and revoked custody agreements. Melissa's face had been plastered across multiple HOA newsletters as a person of concern. Daniel's restaurant investment had been quietly withdrawn by 3 partners. No headlines, just quiet professional disappearance. They had wanted inheritance. They inherited silence. A month later, I was invited to speak at a local community event called Second Voices, a program for grandparents raising grandchildren or those who had been estranged by their families. I stood in a room with 50 strangers. I told them about the toy washing machine, about the card that called me old hag, about the rain and the rusted machine and the fall that almost ended it all. I told them about choosing to be a mother, even when biology refused me that title. I told them about betrayal, but more than that, I told them about surviving it, with grace intact. And finally, I told them the hardest truth of all. Sometimes love isn't missing. It's simply not returned. And that doesn't mean we failed. It just means we loved beyond what the other person could carry. When I finished, they did not applaud loudly. They stood, quietly, in unison. It was the first time in years I had felt seen by a crowd, not out of pity, but out of shared fire. I returned to my room that night and found a small card under my door. It was drawn in crayon. "You are my hero. I'm 8. My grandma said your story is why she moved back with us. I like her again now." It was signed, in crooked letters, Benji. I held the card to my heart. Then I looked to the shelf where I kept my single framed photo, not of the toy, but of Emily, reading to me in the garden, her legs tucked under her, her voice full of magic. She had written a note on the back. "You taught me how to fight kindly. That's what I'll carry forever." This is not just a story of betrayal. It is a story of reclamation, of a woman who had been folded too many times, of a heart that had been cracked open, not by surgery, but by silence, and of the truth that once spoken cannot be undone. My name is Nora Mae Caldwell. I am not just a mother. I am not just a widow. I am not just a joke on a slideshow. I am a witness, and now, finally, I am free. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. I didn't share this for sympathy. I shared it so the quiet ones know they're not alone. Some truths take years to surface. Some love turns out to be loyalty, misplaced. But dignity? Dignity doesn't expire, and neither does truth. If this story moved you even a little, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. There are more truths to tell, from women who were ignored until the day they weren't, because revenge doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with a smile and a will. And when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens.